I acknowledge, first of all, the ancestral and traditional lands of the Blackfoot, whose lands we are located, and whose ancestors' knowledge and language have sustained and protected this land. My name is Marie Battiste. I'm a member of the Mi'kmaq Nation and professor for the past 21 years in the Department of Educational Foundations at the University of Saskatchewan. A graduate of Harvard University in Educational Administration and Stanford University in Bilingual Education and Literacy, my published work and scholarly pursuits are forged in unpacking language, unpacking the privilege and effects of Eurocentrism on Indigenous peoples in education. My dissertation examined the social and cultural consequences of Mi'kmaq literacy and the manner by which Mi'kmaq communication traditions evolved through several oral-mediated symbolic systems, and the manner by which their teachings and traditions were subverted by English literacy movement that left them illiterate and damaged and diminished by English literacy and educational traditions. My recently launched book last month, Decolonizing Education, Nourishing the Learning Spirit, relays the evolving process of my finding my passion and my activism for effecting change and transformation in education, which was inspired by my own family's seeking to find a life out of poverty, and from which my own recognition of the systemic cognitive imperialism in education that continue to marginalize First Nations and Indigenous peoples worldwide. In effecting educational transformations in this modern era, my scholarship then has extended throughout the educational systems. In the fields of elementary and secondary education, I've taught and administered First Nation schools in my home communities, created the first Mi'kmaq language-based bilingual school in the Maritimes, researched and developed Mi'kmaq curriculum leading to the Mi'kmaq Center of Excellence, partnered to help create the Mi'kmaq Maliseet teacher education program at the University of New Brunswick, and forged the current educational authority, Mi'kmaq Ganam Madimkaway in Nova Scotia, that is the first and only First Nations legislated model in Canada. My work with the schools in the East has not been deflected by my living in Saskatchewan. More recently, I'm preparing a reform curriculum in Atlantic post-secondary education for animating the Mi'kmaq humanities, a project funded by the Social Science Humanity Research Council of Canada, and in another SSHRC-sponsored grant with the University of Toronto, University of Toronto's Canadian Science Prevention Cluster, we are exploring the systems of violence prevention with youth, as well as examining the systemic forms of violence in colonial systems of privilege. In higher education, I first coordinated the SSHRC-sponsored Summer Institute in 1996 that drew in international scholars, Indigenous scholars, to a dialogue that led to my first book called Reclaiming Indigenous Voice and Vision in the year 2000. This book has engaged young Indigenous scholars and those seeking to learn about what the next steps beyond the recognition of the colonial apparatus of education that's created layers of oppression among Indigenous peoples worldwide. My passion for change in the Academy has been enriched by the international advocacy work with the United Nations, Principles and Guidelines for the Protection of Indigenous Heritage, and the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in 2007. I've also been working with the Tri-Council on forging appropriate and respectful ethics for doing research with the Indigenous peoples, this work leading to another co-authored book called Protecting Indigenous Knowledge and Heritage in 2000. The 20-year struggle for the ratification of the Declaration shaped a renaissance, a vital, energizing force for forging our merged determination around those collective rights and around a reclamation and restoration process among and with Aboriginal peoples. This has been the grounding focus of my academic work. At the national level, I've been the first director of the Aboriginal Education Research Centre at the University of Saskatchewan, co-director of the Canadian Council of Learning's Aboriginal Learning Knowledge Centre, and founding member of the Aboriginal Forum with the Canadian Association of University Teachers. I've also been a founding member and a First Sage, an honorary title for the president of the Canadian Association for the Study of Indigenous Education in the Canadian Society for the Study of Education at the Congress. Unpacking Eurocentric frameworks and increasing the viability of Mi'kmaq and other First Nations curricula shaped by languages and First Nations Indigenous knowledges has been the continuing parts of my scholarship that has taken me through the globe, teaching, dialoguing, and collaborating with other communities and setting out to change various educational academies and standards for success in community-based understandings, principles, and teachings. Anti-racist and anti-colonial, anti-oppressive theories and pedagogies have accompanied my teaching responsibilities in the College of Education at the University of Saskatchewan. That's helped me understand the resistances and challenges to the institutional Eurocentric hegemony. To conclude, my teaching, research, learning, scholarship, and advocacy thus frame a commitment to and passion with social justice and Indigenous empowerment toward the deconstruction of the hegemonic systems of power that have so diminished Indigenous peoples worldwide, understanding of themselves and their knowledge systems, and the reconstruction and re-empowerment of our representations of ourselves and of the forging systems of social justice that nourish our learning spirit and re-educate settler societies to these as well, so that it would be a potential to nourish us all. Thank you very much. Goals might begin to come together. Yes?
I mean, the list was enormous. What's been most meaningful to you?
Oh, what a wonderful question. I think working with my own people have been the most meaningful part of my life, and that's because, you know, growing up well, I grew up off reserve and then came back to the reserve. It's been a way of helping me to shape an education all the way through from early childhood right through the university. So what I did in the early years in working with the schools was really in the early education, and then as time went on I was working with the other levels. So then when I went away and came back, working on Mi'kmaq humanities has been the most enriching part. Thank you for the question. Yes?
Nikki, I'm going to ask people to use the microphone if they have a question. Maybe I can bring that to you.
Marie, great presentation. I just want to ask your advice. You know, the Royal Society is now involved in a mentorship program with Indigenous students. And can you offer some advice? I have 2 Indigenous students now to mentor, one from the Okanagan and one from the North. And if you gave us 3 things that we should concentrate on, what would they be?
I would say that I would say that first of all, mentoring people to understand that where they come from has the richest resource of information, knowledge, and teachings that will restore them and heal them and help them work through the system. I think that one of the things that I mistakenly got in my head very early was that I had to learn everybody else's system and not my own. And after I did that, and I would say I did a fair job. I don't think I did a very great job at that, but I did a fair job getting through. But I would say that when the aha moment came was for me when I realized that my own father and mother who had no education and my own people who had very little formal education had the best resource of knowledge that was going to continue to help me through and in everything I was doing. And so I'd say going back there and getting that kind of thing is both the best thing they can do. And I would say the second thing is for helping the students to realize that the Eurocentric system that they have had to go through, and one that has diminished them, the prejudices, the racism, and all the kinds of things that they've had to endure has been part of that system. And it has privileged certain groups, and I think that a lot of people don't even realize the nature of systemic racism that is ongoing. And I think that those two things, to me, leads to the final researching and finding their own learning spirit, which would be, where's your passion, where do you stand on, and where do you want to go?